my presentation is about Italy, actually, about Italian leaders that probably you are not familiar with. But I will show you very quickly how the Italian big populist and non-populist leaders use the social media, especially Facebook. So this is a research that has been done, and we have written about. But the first part will be more theoretical, so probably you will feel yourself more comfortable with what I'm going to say. As I said, it's populism is expanding all over Europe, but not only in Europe, because we have seen, what happened in the United States, not only recently. If you go back in history of the United States, I'm speaking about this, the 70s and in the 80s, there were movements that nowadays we would call populist movements, but they weren't strong enough to become hegemonic. So they were isolated, strong but isolated. Now in Europe, to remain in our continent, we have a lot of examples, almost in all countries. Maybe some countries are less prone to have populist, right-wing populism, because there is a right-wing and left-wing populism. But what is common in all countries where there are populist leaders is the charismatic and media-savvy personality of these people. Most of these people know how to manipulate or to use the media logic. And so that makes them very effective in their communication and also in their gathering of public support. And they know how to, as I said, they know how to make the agenda come into their mill because they use contentious words, they insult people, they insult other parties. So all this is good for the journalist, because if you behave correctly, you won't hit the headlines. But if you start doing something wrong, well, the media will chase you and will give you coverage and visibility, and they know that, so they misbehave in a way, with respect to democracy. Here is a demonstration of how the populists, in this case, the votes for populist parties have grown since 2000. And so it's coming up, it's going up and up, as the Hungarian example yesterday, and also your example 2 years ago. What is populism? Well, I mean, we might stay for a week here to try to define what is populism, because there isn't actually a given definition accepted by everybody. Also because populism is in itself a phenomenon that changes from one place to the other, from one charismatic leader to the other. So there were some attempts by key theorists like Canovan, like Taguieff, like Taggart, to give some explanation, at least to describe what is populism. So, but as I said, you don't find a given definition. I mean, you have to connect the definition of populism to a certain context. So as I said, we have right-wing populism like Le Pen, Farage, Trump, your own leaders here, but also left-wing populism, which is more rare. But you have good examples. I put Grillo there, who is the Italian. Well, I mean, sometimes you wonder, is he left-wing or right-wing? It's both. But the rhetoric that his movement uses is more socially oriented, let's put it that way. So again, also in his case, it's hard to define what is the Grillo movement populism. here we have some two insightful focuses by Cas Mudde, who is an authority in the field. He speaks of populist zeitgeist. That is the populist discourse that, according to him, has gone mainstream in the politics of contemporary Western democracies. So he says that you find some populism in all the speeches of politicians, even though they are not defined in terms of classic populism. So this is quite insightful because it's part of our study to see how the populist rhetoric becomes endemic in political discourse. And de Agers and Walgraaf, two Dutch scholars, have come up with a controversial definition saying that populism is actually a communication style. It sounded a kind of diminishing of the importance of populism, because populism is also something tough, really, you can really touch it. So they distinguish a thin kind of populism, a political style adopted by all kinds of politicians in all times, which in a way repeats what Cas Mudde says about the populist zeitgeist, and the thick. And so they say, well, yes, of course, there is also the thick kind of political rhetoric, and that's populism when it is implemented in policies and in policy movements. So I wanted to quote these two people because they have been very insightful in the research and the reflection about populism all over Europe, especially. But what I like most is the populism according to a group of people like Reinemann and others, of the Coast Action that was quoted by Agnieszka. They have done a really good job in defining the features of populism. So they speak in terms of populism, distinguishing populism from other ideologies like socialism, like communism, like liberalism, and so on. They say, well, we have populism in terms of the people at the center of the definition. So populists try to create a new social identity among citizens in order to unite them and generate a sense of belonging to an imagined community. And also, another feature is the construction of the others as counterparts, something that has to be the enemy, something that has to be a group out of the core community of which we claim to be part of. Now, let's move to the main topic of my presentation, which is the social media and populism. Where do we stand, actually? Yeah, that's a good question, because there is a lot being written about populism, media and populism, classical media, and also there is an increase in studies on social media. So our study is part of this production of scholarly reflection on populism and social media. As I mentioned before, usually the populist leaders that we know around Europe and not only rely very much on the classical media, because television, radio mostly, but television is the main medium that has given them popularity, visibility, centrality into the public debate, because you can see them on television, so they know, so they appear, they are controversial, as I said. So these media have not necessarily been supportive. They have been, some of them, supportive, but also very critical. But, to As one leading Italian leader said once, very popular, Andreotti said, well, you can, talk evil about me if you want, but as long as you talk about me, I will be happy. So these people follow the same policy, the same conviction. They say, okay, you're criticizing me, but if you criticize me, I will be on top of the news every day. And so this is something that has been observed so far in the mainstream media. However, something is changing, as you, especially young people, know. We are right in the middle of a new communication environment that has changed the rules of the game. So, of course, the old media is still around, of course. Don't forget that. Don't say that television doesn't count anymore. It counts a lot. But the new media are entering into the dynamics, and so they are conditioning the new games of interaction between populists and public opinion, and populists and other parties, and so on. Why? Because the new media have given to the populists new platforms, new tools for communication. Look, Facebook, Twitter. Do you know how President Trump has been nicknamed? The Twitter in chief, because he communicates through Twitter, which is something that the American, especially the American scholars are studying. They are very focusing on the phenomenon, because it never happened before. Not even Obama was so tweeting, bombarding public opinion with tweets. He did some tweeting, but normal. But compared to Mr. Trump, so the populists have new instruments, very powerful instruments, of which still we don't really understand and don't know the power and the effectiveness. So the example of Trump is being studied also in order to understand how powerful these new media can be in the public communication, in the political communication, in the policies. Here, one British scholar, Chadwick, spoke in terms of hybrid. He was. I told him, you have been studying diplomacy probably. You put together, the old media and the new media, and you say hybrid. It's a hybrid communication landscape, which is a good definition, meaning that the new media are changing the rules of the game, but at the same time they are, collaborating, so to speak, with the old media, and so this is a hybrid landscape. Which has some features interesting for studying political communication and populist communication. Now, yesterday, for those who were following my lecture, I mentioned the idea of media logic. Media logic is mostly commercial logic. The industry of the media has to follow certain demands of, in order to have audiences, to have advertising, and so on. So that sort of media logic that in a way was used by the populist leaders to become visible thanks to the attention of the media. Well, that media logic is still around, of course, but we might say that in a hybrid context, we should look for something new. So a new media logic, okay? I will come to that in a moment. So, well, we are all agreed that social media are structurally different from traditional media, because there is an interaction, they are on demand, they are online, they are instant, and so on, and especially interactive, because the old media were not interactive, even though the technology later made them a little bit more interactive than in the past. So the social media follow since are very different from the traditional media, the social media follow a media logic that has to do with the interactive relations that can be established between senders and receivers. Especially, this is very important, especially allowing the players, the political players, to bypass the gatekeeping of the old media. Because the old media had the power, still have the power, to filter or to stop to gatekeeping. The new media, if you use the new media, so the social media like Facebook and Twitter, in general, if you use Facebook, you can communicate your own ideas to your circles of friends, and nobody will intervene to stop you and say you are saying something that shouldn't be said unless you use foul language. There are certain limitations, but nothing compared to the limitations of the old media. So we probably should start looking at the way the new media work in terms of a new media logic. As the Althede and Snow in 1979 and 1991, Althede and Snow developed a very interesting theory about the media logic, the mass media logic. Now we probably should at least add the new media logic, and two scholars, one Ulrike Klinger from Berlin and Svensson from, I guess, from Sweden, developed a very interesting approach that they called network media logic, not new media logic, but network media logic, that works in the three domains of production, distribution, and usage. I recommend the article because it's really insightful. And in brief, I'm going very quickly here and giving you the outline. According to them, the network media logic means that the populist leaders can get in touch with their supporters, protected from any mediation of the old media. As I said, the interactive nature of the new media and the disintermediation, that's a key word that has been used very often in the literature. Disintermediation, well, that gives a lot of power to Trump to communicate to the media and to the people, for instance, what he thinks about Syria or about North Korea, okay? So this disintermediation means especially that you can avoid being filtered and being gatekept and being censored sometimes by journalists and by other types of gatekeepers. So this is really a big step in the power of politicians in general and of populist leaders in particular. And again, on the network media logic, we can also say that the nature of horizontality, meaning that we can communicate at the same level. There is not a sender and a receiver. We are all senders and receivers at the same time. This allows a vast circulation with a high potential impact. We have very good examples of this potential impact in many cases. Also, again, in the case of Trump, even though we must say that there are some limitations in this viral diffusion of our messages. It's the echo chamber. It has been called the echo chamber or the homophily of the internet, meaning that we tend to communicate among those who think the same way about certain issues. So that's a limitation of this viral diffusion. But the potentiality of the new media is so beyond imagination, I must say, because at least speaking of my imagination, I come from an age of television and mass communication. So I converted to new media. I use the new media, but I probably more than you young people. I'm still amazed at how the world has changed so much in terms of communication and the power of communication of people. We didn't have so much power of communicate, of networking, for instance, that it was impossible, very difficult, and it took ages before getting in touch with the rest of the scholarly community, to give you a personal example. But now this is all made easy, and it has the pros and the cons, of course, but let's go on with our... now, probably I skipped, let me see if I skipped, no. Yeah, now I'm coming to the research part, the empirical part of our research in Italy, and these are the research questions that we try to respond to. There are three research questions. Is it possible to identify the existence of an endemic populism? Remember, it's a populist zeitgeist in social media, not in general, but in social media, used in terms of their use of social media by political actors. And the second research question is, what are the specific aspects of socially mediated populism? And the third question was, what are the different degrees? We try to measure the degrees of populism in the rhetoric used by leaders on Facebook, social media. So we focus only on Facebook, not on Twitter. That would need another major research. So we work on a case study, which is, according to us, quite significant. The five most influential leaders that are still fighting these days, and today, the 10th of April, they are still fighting how to get a government. But we are in good company, because the Germans took 6 months before getting a government, so we just voted a month ago. So give us time. We will find a way to find a coalition. But they are so divided among themselves, even though they are populist, almost all of them except Renzi. Anyway, Mr. Berlusconi, Forza Italia, leader of Forza Italia. The other bearded man is Matteo Salvini, who got more votes than Berlusconi. They are allied right now, so they look at each other in a nervous way. So Berlusconi says, I am the leader of the coalition, but Salvini says, but I got more votes than you did. So who is the leader? So, it's a human thing, but also a political thing. And then Luigi Di Maio, he's the front runner of the Five Stars movement. Those people, the Five Stars leaders of the party, got more votes than any other party. So they have the leading. They are the leading party in Italy. And by the way, it didn't exist until 2013. It's a brand new party, created by a comedian like Mr. Grillo. That Grillo was and still is a comedian, still active, not really on television, but in theaters and online. So he put up a party, which has become the biggest party, even though they don't have yet the majority. But if we go back to elections, just in case it happens that we don't put the government together in Italy, we might go back to vote, as the Spanish did. And in that case, everybody is afraid of. In that case, the five-star movement might get the majority, because people would be unhappy about the dynamics and that came up. So anyway, let's get back to Giorgia Meloni. Is a minor but neo-fascist leader in the alliance with Berlusconi. And Matteo Renzi, leader of the Democratic Party, we say from the stars to the barn. Stars because he was the prime minister, young prime minister, 39 years old, brilliant. Everybody was loving him, and all of a sudden he fell into the barn, like with the pigs and cows and sheep and so on. So we use that sort of metaphor, from the stars to the barn. Dalle stelle alle stalle, it sounds also, in Italian, it sounds also almost the same word. Anyway, Matteo Renzi, we put him into the research because we wanted to see if also the Democratic Party used some populist rhetoric in order to respond to one of the research questions that had to do with the Casmuddes populist zeitgeist. Few figures about the Italian social media landscape. Italy has 70 million people, 43 million people are internet users, 34 million are media users, and 34 million active users. So the numbers, the figures are big in Italy. So Facebook is really something that weighs a lot in political communication in Italy, so that's why it deserves to be studied, more than Twitter, of course, and also probably also in Poland. Facebook is very popular, and Twitter is more, kind of elite sort of platform. So we collected in 1 year time about 3,700 posts of these people, not necessarily with populist content. All the posts of these people have been analyzed, and we looked into them, and we saw that the engagement, meaning that the strong interaction between leaders and their followers, was from a minimum of 7,000 interactions of Giorgia Meloni, who was and still is the leader of the smallest neo-fascist party, to a maximum of more 25,000 of Salvini, the one that got more votes right now in the last elections, and more than Berlusconi. So the Italian internet users are very active, as I said, on Facebook. In 1 year, the 5 leaders received more than 53 million interactions, which is quite a lot. Now, we try to measure the degree of populist communicative ideology, and we drew from the most recent literature on populism as communication style. I'm interested in the communicative dimension of populism. And the populist ideology was broken down by our study into 3 dimensions that we also called fragments in the article: the appeal to the people, attacking the elite, and ostracizing the others. And we applied what the literature has provided us. The appeal to the people, what does it mean? Well, the construction of the people, the idea of the people, means, as they say, appeals to the people, talking about the people, putting the people and their options first, or symbolically and rhetorically uniting the leaders with the people by talking about we and us. This is typical of the appeal to the people. We developed here a few sub-dimensions of this appeal to the people. 4 dimensions here: sovereignty, so references to sovereignty, I will explain it in a moment, to class, social class, to nation and ethnic group, and cultural dimensions of this appeal to the people. The dimension of sovereignty is that the people is the ruler, of democracy. And this is part of the democratic theory, by the way. So the sovereignty of the people, but they insist in emphasizing the people as the ruler, but but emphasizing in terms of being betrayed by the elites. So the people, yes, everybody says that we are the rulers, but the elites betray us, they say. So this is the insisting on the sovereignty dimension of the people. The reference to the class, especially in Italy, all the populist leaders refer many times, and also Renzi, to the underprivileged citizens, the poor, those who had lost their jobs, that they didn't have enough opportunity to get an education. Very often emphasizing the fact that this negative situation, social situation, is to be attributed to the invasion of immigrants. In Italy, it's a big thing. It's a big thing. We have, I guess, probably 1.5 million illegal immigrants that we have to manage, and that situation created also in the last election a lot of tensions. More than in Hungary, where they don't have many, even though they sell the idea, we are invaded by whom? I mean, there is nobody around there. But in Italy, we might say that we are invaded. And I didn't say it, don't quote me on that. But these populist leaders, often they said, even Berlusconi on television said, we have 600,000 people to kick out of the country and send them back to where they come from, Berlusconi. For a moment, he said, well, he was actually trying to compete with Salvini, who is an ally of him. So there was some competition, but this is kind of not really populist, but political dynamic. Then the reference to the nation and ethnic group, and this is probably more familiar to you also in your country. The people is understood as a national community, sort of racist dimension here. We don't use the term racist, but in many rhetorics that we hear of certain leaders. Also the Turkish leader, for instance, he said, the Turks are a nation, we are a people. Well, that's insisting, has to do with nation and ethnic dimension. And finally, this is lighter. The people as the good people, religious people, or the cultural references. We Italians are coming from the Renaissance, or the Romans, that all sorts of rhetoric that it sounds awful, but it's not so offensive as saying to kick out 600,000 people from the country. But so if you say that, the Italian culture has to be defended, okay, but you can say the Polish culture should be defended, the Hungarian culture should be defended, the French culture should be defended. You could hear this sort of repetitions in many examples. The second dimension is attacking the elite, and here, well, is also a very standard dimension or fragment. The anti-elitism of a lot of populist ideology and of populist rhetoric. The anti-elitism and the anti-establishment. We are better than you. The us and them, okay? And the us and them, that has also to do with the ostracizing the others. Since you are no good, I don't like you, I ostracize. Ostracize means to kick out. That's a vulgar translation of ostracizing, which is a Greek word, ostrakon, meaning that, it was signed, the name was put on a block of piece of clay, ostrakon, and so that the origin of the term ostracizing, to kick out someone from the city. So the ostracization sounds awful. Of the others involves a narrative based on dangerous others. All these immigrants have to be kicked out according to Berlusconi, because they are a threat to the country, a threat to the common people, threat to the Italians who lose their jobs. It doesn't matter if it is true or not, but it is sold by the leaders as true, It's not a fake news. It's what I say. Berlusconi says, I'm an authority, so if I tell you, you have to believe me. That's the message. But this is a summary of the populist fragments. You see on the left-hand side, sovereignty, nation, class, and cultural. And the other dimensions are attacking the elite and ostracizing the others. You see here the frequency of how many times Salvini, the green one, the green column is Salvini, who's the leading populist representative in Italy. He excels everywhere, especially on nation, ethnic, and on attacking the elite, and especially ostracizing the other, to kick out all the immigrants from Italy. And now here probably is our most original part, trying to build a populism index. Many scholars have tried to measure. So we also tried to measure the communicative dimensions of the populism in the social media. And we came up with an additive index. You can see it better here. The zero level of populism, soft populism, moderate populism, and bold, attacking, hard, tough populism. The zero level of populism that we used to apply to the Facebook posts of all these leaders is when there is no populist reference at all, so from zero. The soft populism, when the posts contain only one populist reference. Because, as I said, it's hard to avoid some populist reference, and so many leaders, even though they are not populist, might use certain words and certain expressions. Moderate populism, if the posts contain a combination of two populist references, and bold populism, the posts contain all three populist references: appeal to the people, attacking the elite, and ostracizing the others. As expected, the appeal to the people is the most frequent ideology fragment. Well, populism, after all, is based on appeal to the people here, the people there, the people up, the people down. And so that was expected. So 59% in all posts of Facebook posts. The emphasis on sovereignty, that's a fragment, is mainly used by Silvio Berlusconi and Luigi Di Maio, so more or less the same, with some difference here, because the emphasis on sovereignty, by the way, is a sign of soft populism, which in this case can be interpreted for Berlusconi in terms of advocacy, the defense of the Italian people, and by Luigi Di Maio. Luigi Di Maio is the leader of the five-star movement, Grillo movement, in terms of legitimization of the people, because they believe in the direct democracy. So the people is the foundation of democracy, which is right, of course, but we also invented in the meantime, since the French Revolution days, and from the Enlightenment, we invented the representative democracy that they don't like, because the representative democracy creates an elite of people in parliament. Another finding is that the construction of the people as nation and ethnicity is mostly adopted by right-wing leaders. This is also kind of expectable because, right-wing leaders, and in our case also neo-fascist leaders, count very much on patriotism, for instance, nation, we are not so much Italians because the Italian people is a mixture of many people. Nobody says that the purity of the Italian race, no, it sounds awful, but you won't believe it. The current president of my region, Lombardy, made a mistake one day during the campaign. He said, "We have to defend the Italian race." Oh my goodness, what an outrage all over Italy. What's the Italian race? But this kind of rhetoric, you find it in Turkey, you find it in Hungary, you probably find it somewhere else. So nation and ethnicity. Here, the center-right, there is some an increase here from the center-right to the far-right, as I said. Silvio Berlusconi, 21%. Giorgia Meloni, neo-fascist, 34%. And Matteo Salvini, not the founder, but the leader of the former Northern League, but now it's the League. No Northern anymore. So it's a national league. Xenophobic, 42%. The other dimensions were more or less important, the attacking the elites and ostracizing the others, so I will skip them. Now, few words on Matteo Renzi's populism, because we decided to put him to the analysis because we wanted to see not the negative, like in the photography, you have to have the negative in order to understand, to have a better idea of the positive printout of a photography. So we had it as a negative example to see if also a non-populist party like the Democratic Party, which is socialist, Christian democratic, sort of, progressive party, had some populist dimensions in Renzi, at least, in the the leader of the party. In these rhetorics, we find sometimes the us against them, but not us Italians against them immigrants, but us Democrats, Christian Democrats or democratic, against those within his party who were against the transformation of the party into more progressive party. So there was a resistance inside the party, a conservative resistance. So us against them was used in terms of internal party dynamics. But it sounded a bit populist, so it's an intra-party populism, you might say. So this result appears coherent with the hypothesis that also non-populist actors do not disdain, often, sometimes, from using populist references in social media. Because he was, by the way, Mr. Renzi is an intensive user of the social media, Twitter and Facebook, not as much as Trump, of course. But, kind of very active and very, he's got a group of people helping him. Like Salvini, by the way, we discovered that he had a powerful machine of social media. Really very powerful, very smart young people that helped him in establishing networks, relations, prizes, awards for those who were really scientific, really a very special case in the last election. So we are studying now the election campaign dynamics, and comes up this sort of phenomena. So also the non-populist leaders do not disdain. Sometimes they use the rhetoric, populist rhetorics to a certain extent, without exaggerating, and so. But we found that also Renzi can be defined to a certain extent populist. Conclusions and. Am I in time? Or?
Yeah, we still got.
Okay, good.
Still one. We've got 35 minutes.
I listed the conclusions very schematically. The populist communicators, more than other mainstream party figures, can exploit to their great advantage the disintermediated nature of social media. So this is not to say that they don't use the old media anymore. They still use the old media very intensively, but they rely more and more on social media. Like Salvini, for instance, he was complaining about scarce coverage by the public television channels of his campaign, the last campaign. And he was every night was on the commercial channels, talking to the Italians and discussing in the talk shows and so on. But he, as I said a minute ago, he used very much the social media. And so that helped him a lot in the final performance and the final result of the last election. From our analysis, there emerges evidence of endemic populism. We should probably focus more on certain data. We might do it later, but because this endemic populism is not really clear in terms of definition, but we have this suspicion that this endemic populism should be more identified and studied in terms of in empirical terms. We don't have enough empirical support for this hypothesis, but at least we have some signs that there is an endemic sort of populism that is spreading everywhere. So Kasmude, when he said talked about the populist zeitgeist, it was completely right. And it's really in the mainstream, even though not all the dimensions like ostracizing the others, you don't find that, but the rhetoric, certain keywords are also used by officially non-populist leaders. And then we also found, it was much expected, but at least we had the empirical evidence. There was a cleavage between populist leaders in Italy. The center-right and center-left leaders tend to be more soft populist. Now, Berlusconi and Matteo Renzi. Silvio Berlusconi, well, I gave you the example of the last election, which is not the example that was studied in our research project here, because it was last year. But the last election was the 4th of March, and Berlusconi spoke in terms of kicking out 600,000 people probably in February, recently. But that was probably an example, a strange example of his hard and bold populism. But he tends to be a soft populist. And the extreme right leaders, that's much to be expected, tend to be a more bold populist in their approach to immigration issues, social issues, economic issues. They really use hard expressions, tough and also very offensive expressions in terms of with relation to many sectors of society. And finally, the populism index confirms that it can be very difficult to identify specific actors as sheer populist or non-populist. So far we took for granted that there are populists and non-populists. Well, yes, of course, the populists can be clearly identified as populists, but the non-populist, it's hard to put them into a clear light. So, because the fragmentation of the populist ideology and the strong polarization, which is typical of social media environment, the polarized sectors of electorate and the public opinion, push leaders to adopt one or more populist references according to, like Berlusconi, it doesn't ostracize, except recently for electoral reasons, but it tends to be more soft in the language. So, but it doesn't disdain to use that language. Okay, thank you. Thank you for.